In this boy, we will see the Gower sign or the Gower maneuver. This boy is suffering from Duchenne type muscular dystrophy, also termed as pseudohypertrophic muscular dystrophy. Note the hypertrophic calf muscles and the lordotic posture. When I ask the child to get up from a squatting position, he first gets on to his hands and knees. Then he takes weight of the body on his hands and extends the knees. Now he climbs on his legs, lifting the trunk up with his hands placed progressively over the knee and the thigh. Once the trunk is raised, he balances himself by attaining lordosis. Let us watch again this boy with severe, that is advanced stage of pseudohypertrophic muscular dystrophy. The characteristic way in which the boy gets up, climbing up on his own legs, is called Gower maneuver or the Gower sign. In a case of head injury, examination of pupils and their comparison is extremely important to diagnose intracranial hemorrhage clinically. Watch the pupils of this patient with head injury. The left pupil is constricted while the right pupil is normal. This suggests compression of the left oculomotor nerve. These are called Hutchinson's pupils stage 1 and suggest an intracranial hematoma on the left side. In the initial stage of a progressively enlarging intracranial hematoma, the pupil on the side of injury contracts due to the irritation of the oculomotor nerve. In the second stage, pupil of the side of injury becomes fully dilated and fixed, not reacting to light, due to paralysis of the oculomotor nerve, while the pupil on the other side contracts due to compression of the opposite oculomotor. In the third stage, pupils of both sides become dilated and fixed. These are Hutchinson's pupils. Dysphasia or aphasia is a cerebral disturbance of speech in which there is a disturbance in the production of speech or in comprehension. To understand aphasia, we must understand speech. Speech has two components: expression of the thoughts in the form of speech or writing, and reception of others' thoughts by understanding the words that are heard or read. So aphasia may be expressive, that is motor aphasia, or receptive, that is sensory aphasia. In motor aphasia, there is inability to speak out the thoughts or write them down in words. The thoughts are there, but the patient cannot express them either by speech or by writing or by both. In sensory aphasia, the patient is unable to understand spoken or written words. Note that the patient can hear what you can say, but he cannot make a meaning out of it, as would happen to you if you hear or read a sentence in a language that you do not understand. You can hear it, but you cannot make a meaning out of it. Now we will see a patient who has expressive aphasia of speech or pure word muteness. When I ask a question to this old man who has had a stroke with left hemiplegia, note the weakness in the left arm. He understands the question and has an answer ready in his brain. But when he tries to answer, he is unable to speak out and he is only uttering some meaningless sounds. Then he suddenly bends down and what does he do? He is writing on the floor the correct answer to my question. That is, written speech is not affected. When I gave him a paper to write, He could write down everything that he wants to tell. When I gave him simple orders like show the tongue or show the teeth, he obeys immediately. That is, there is no problem with the reception and understanding. So this is expressive aphasia of speech or pure word muteness. When you examine a patient for aphasia, the precondition is that the patient must be alert. Now test the 4 components of speech. Does he understand what you ask or speak? Does he understand what he reads? Can he speak out the answers? And can he write down the answers? When the lesion is in Broca's area, all the 4 functions may be lost, which is termed as global aphasia. Hallux valgus with bunion. This patient has presented with pain at the root of the right great toe since 1 week. On inspection, both great toes are seen to be angulated outwards at the metatarsophalangeal joints. This is termed as hallux valgus. Hallux is the Latin word for great toe and valgus means bent outwards or away from the midline. It is usually congenital and usually bilateral. Acquired hallux valgus is more common in females wearing pointed tight shoes. Hallux valgus is asymptomatic, but a severe deformity will cause difficulty in fitting of shoes. The degree of hallux valgus may be measured as the angle between the metatarsal and the great toe. Now note the prominent heads of metatarsals as a result of the deformity. On the right side, the ball of the great toe is swollen, shiny, with thick and hyperpigmented skin. This is due to an inflamed adventitious bursa which develops due to friction and pressure against the footwear. This bursa is termed as bunion. So this is a bilateral hallux valgus with bunion on the right side. In the next case, the right foot shows hallux valgus. In this patient, we can see the other associated features of hallux valgus. Firstly, there is overriding of the toe over the second toe. The great toe is not only adducted but rotated outwards so that its plantar aspect looks laterally. The second toe shows hammer toe deformity. Note that the middle phalanx of the second toe is pointing downwards and the tip of the toe touches the ground. This is a hammer toe. Lastly, test the toe movements which I have not demonstrated here. The metatarsophalangeal joint has normal mobility and on dorsiflexion, the extensor tendon stands out as a tight cord. Restricted movement at metatarsophalangeal joint is seen if there is osteoarthritis of the joint. In this patient, the great toe was above the second toe, but more commonly, as seen in this next case, the second toe overrides the first toe. You must have also noted the mild hammer toe deformity in the second toe. The left great toe also shows a marked valgus, but there is no overriding. In spite of such marked deformity, the patient has no pain. Pain is seen only if the bunion is infected or if osteoarthritis develops in the metatarsophalangeal joint. So this was bilateral hallux valgus. In this patient, the middle and ring fingers of the left hand are joined together. This is termed as syndactyly. The flexion and extension movements of the fingers are normal and functionally there is no deficiency. However, for cosmetic reasons, the patient may opt for separation of the fingers. Syndactyly is termed as simple if it involves only the soft tissues, and complex if the bones are involved. In this patient, the terminal phalanges are bent towards each other and cannot be moved independently. The X-ray shows that the bones are closely opposed with a fibrous joint between them. So this is a complex syndactyly. Syndactyly commonly involves two adjacent fingers, but sometimes it may affect more than two. In this patient, we can see syndactyly of three fingers, middle, ring and little. Also, it is affecting both hands. Syndactyly may affect multiple limbs, in which case often it is bilaterally symmetrical. In the next patient, you can see syndactyly of great toe, second and third toes. Syndactyly of the smaller toes does not merit any treatment. However, syndactyly between great toe and second toe usually needs to be separated to facilitate the use of chappals and suitable footwear. This was syndactyly or joined fingers. Observe the swelling over the sole of this patient. There is a diffuse, hard, subcutaneous swelling in the central part of the sole with multiple sinuses. This is a typical lesion of Madura mycosis or Madura foot. It is a chronic infective granuloma caused by a group of fungi like Nocardia madure, Streptomyces madure and Madurella mycetomae. This is another patient showing subcutaneous swelling behind the lateral malleolus with multiple sinuses. Note the thickening of the tissues as compared to the normal right leg. The infection is usually seen over the feet in persons walking barefooted. The organisms abound in fields and road dust, and they gain entry into the body through thorn pricks. Initially, a hard, painless subcutaneous nodule develops to which the skin is fixed. Later, vesicles appear on the skin which burst to form sinuses. The sinuses discharge serosanguinous fluid with granules. This is a slide with the discharge from the first case. Note the white granules. White and black granules indicate infection by Madurella mycetomae, which is usually limited to the subcutaneous tissues and has a good prognosis. Yellow and red granules indicate Nocardia group of fungi, which invade the deeper muscles and bone early, so complete surgical resection is difficult. In the next case, we can see swelling over the dorsum of the right foot with hyperpigmented skin, multiple scars and sinuses. Note the overall thickness of the foot and filling of the concavity of the plantar instep. The X-ray shows erosion of the second metatarsal with multiple punched out cavities giving honeycomb appearance. Bone is affected quite early in nocardia infections. However, Madura mycosis does not have lymphatic spread and it does not affect tendons and nerves. Oral submucous fibrosis. Now we are going to see 3 cases of oral submucous fibrosis with varying degrees of restriction of jaw opening. This patient shows the typical white color of submucous fibrosis over the palate, behind the molars and over the cheek mucosa. There is white discoloration of the tongue mucosa also. But this patient is able to open the jaw fully. There is no restriction. In contrast, this patient has a restricted jaw opening. The jaw opens by 2 centimeters as the distance measured between the upper and lower incisor teeth. The patient may judge it himself by inserting 1, 2 or 3 fingers vertically between the incisor teeth. A normal person can easily insert 3 fingers, while this person can insert 2 fingers only. The third patient has an even more restricted jaw opening. He cannot insert even 1 finger. he has to turn the finger horizontal to insert it into the mouth. The jaw opens less than 1 centimeter. Another test for oral submucous fibrosis is to test the ability to balloon out the cheeks. Ask the patient to fill air in the cheeks. This patient of oral submucous fibrosis cannot distend the cheeks, which remain flat. Observe the skin lesions in this patient. There are multiple bright pink, slightly raised plaques of varying sizes spread all over the body, trunk and limbs. On closer inspection, the plaques are covered by loose silvery scales. This is psoriasis. The epidermal cells proliferate too fast and pile up. The excessive keratin which is produced forms the typical loose silvery scales. It is associated with dermal inflammation, which is predominant in this patient, seen as bright pink and raised plaques. The scalp is usually affected in psoriasis, and if you suspect psoriasis, you should always examine the scalp for the scaly lesions. You should also examine the nails for pitting and onycholysis, and examine the distal interphalangeal joints of the fingers for psoriatic arthritis. This is a case of varicose veins with varicosity of the long saphenous vein. Inspect the ankle. There is a network of fine venules just under the skin around the medial malleolus, ending under the thick skin of the heel. This play of venules is called ankle flare or venous flare. It is associated with tissue edema, seen as fullness behind the medial malleolus, flattening the concavity between the medial malleolus and the tendo achillis. Ankle flare is usually seen around the medial malleolus, occasionally on the lateral side. It indicates incompetency of the ankle perforators and is a precursor to varicose ulcer. Dermatitis, hyperpigmentation and venous ulcer follow if neglected. The treatment is use of proper varicose vein stockings or elastocrep bandage during daytime and limb elevation at night.